What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be discussing the Stamina Warden. This is going to be a double bow build. So clearly a stamina build that is purely ranged using just the bow. It's not going to be the best damage dealer, especially when it comes to comparing it to your standard dual wield bow. Stamina DPS. However, it does kind of give you a little bit of additional flexibility when it comes to using ranged as a stamina DPS. Plus, it's always nice to have a nice change of pace here. Like I said, it's not going to pull nearly as high as a dual-wield bow build, but it still pulls fairly respectable numbers, and it's enough to get by the Vet Craglorn trials. Probably not quite enough in order to get past the meet the DPS checks for Vetmar or VHoff, but it's definitely perfectly viable if all you're planning on doing is, 4-man content, or, like I said, the Vet Craglorn trials. You can probably bring this build in and still be very successful. So just like our other build videos, we'll be going over our gear, CP point distribution, skill bars. We'll be talking about attributes, race, things like that. We'll go over the rotation a little bit on the 3 million dummy, so you guys can get an idea of what's going on with the rotation, what the mindset is. And then we'll close things off with the 6 million dummy rotation, so you guys can get an idea of the actual rotation at length, as well as the sustain that you can expect to see on this build. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with our gear first. So for our gear, we are using a monster helm set, so we are using Velidreths. So now the thing here with a bow build is that you only have 11 slots of equipment slots basically to play around with, unlike with the dual wield build where you have 12 equipment slots on your front bar. So this kind of limits your kind of flexibility when it comes to sets. So it's very much like a two-hander stamina build in that you pretty much have two options here. You can either go with two 5-piece sets, forgo the Monster Helm set, and then use your two special bows, which we'll go over in a little bit. Or we can go one 5-piece set, a 3-piece set, and keep our Monster Helm and our special bows as well. So you kind of have two routes to take here. And generally speaking, holding onto your Monster Helm is going to give you better DPS overall. It's going to have better returns compared to using two 5-piece sets and giving up your Monster Helm. So over here, we're going to be using Velidreths. Velidreth is really the only option here when it comes to Monster Helm sets. There is potentially one other option. Let me see if I can find it. The only other option that I can think of that would be somewhat useful here would be Stormfist. Stormfist, the proc chance is just on damage alone, doesn't have to be melee damage like Cillian's. So pretty much your only options here for Monster Helms are going to be Stormfist or Velidreth, and Velidreth is generally going to be a little bit better. That being said, though, Stormfist is nice because it does give you stamina regen on the one piece, and as you'll see on the 6 million dummy test, this build does lack a fair amount of regen here. Even we are doing a heavy attack build just like the build from Clockwork City, but we're only having 2 heavy attacks on our front bar, and that's not quite enough in order to sustain us over longer fights. So Stormfist might not be a bad idea, even though the 2-piece is going to end up doing a little bit less damage compared to Velidreths, just because of that stamina regen on the 1-piece. For our 5-piece set, we are going with War Machine. Now you can have several options here when it comes to your 5-piece set. So this particular build, we're going to be using Wild Guardian as our ultimate, which is a 75 cost ultimate, so that's why we're able to use War Machine. This also gives us Major Slayer, as well as provide Major Slayer to 2 other allies. So the Bow Warden is unique, or kind of unique in the Stamina DPS class, in that they are the only ones who can provide Major Slayer to ranged DPS, so basically your Magicka DPS. The other basically, Wardens are the only class that can take advantage of War Machine and Master Architect to give Major Slayer to their ranged DPS friends. So that's kind of a unique niche role for a Bow Warden. So for your other potential options here for 5-piece sets, like I said, you have plenty of options. You can go with Night Mother's Gaze or Sunderflame. We are doing heavy attacks on the front bar, so we can proc Sunderflame. You can use Morag Tong as well, if you'd like. Generally speaking, Morag Tong is only really going to be useful when you have 2 or 3 stamina DKs or more. Otherwise, it's not really worth running Morag Tong because the DPS increase isn't going to be very noticeable compared to using something like Hunding's Rage. Hunding's is another potential 5-piece you can wear. Mechanical Acuity is another potential 5-piece. Red Mountain actually isn't that bad. If you guys remember from a Clockwork City video, I actually used Red Mountain as my 5-piece. That's not a terrible set to use. And Powerful Assault, if you want to be, help out with buffing. It's not quite good. It's not going to be quite as useful compared to something like SPC or something like that, but it's still a potential option there if you want to give your group a little bit of an additional buff. So like I said, this is generally not going to be able to pull the same DPS as a dual wield build. So play around a little bit. All of the different sets, at least that I've used, they all pulled pretty much close to the same DPS here, no matter what 5-piece you decide to go. For our jewelry sets, so jewelry is pretty much where you're going to use your 3-piece set. So in this case, you're going to be using agility. It is gold agility here. However, in the live server, because this is on the PTS, on the live server, you could only get purple jewelry. So that's something to keep in mind when we go over our parts. You're going to have a little bit of a decrease in the 2- and 3-piece bonuses as well as the max stamina. So you're just going to go with 3-piece agility. You can go with something like 3-piece VO as well. But because we are using War Machine, we still have that minor slayer. So if you are going to be going with War Machine, go with agility instead of VO, just because you don't take doubling up on minor slayer is pretty much going to be a waste of that 3-piece effect. Make sure when you are using agility that you are using robust jewelry, not arcane, not healthy. And we're going with 3 weapon damage glyphs on our jewelry here. Now for our front bar, we're going with a Master's Bow infused with a weapon damage enchant. This comes from Dragonstar Arena on Vet, so it is fairly difficult to obtain, or I shouldn't say fairly difficult, but it is one of the hardest format content in the game right now, so that's something you want to consider. If you don't have the Master's Bow, you can use the Asylum's Bow instead. You will have to change up a little bit, so basically instead of using instead of having what is it that I have, Cutting Dive on your front bar, you'd be using Arrow Spray and be introducing that into your rotation. So I'll kind of show you a little bit of what that rotation would look like. I am using Infused, but you can go with Nirn if you'd like. From my experience though, Infused pulls just a little bit ahead, but they pull very similar DPS, so it could be either way. It's pretty much within margin of error there. So Infused or Nirn, just make sure to have that weapon damage enchant. And for our back bar, we're still sticking with the Maelstrom Bow with Double Ravage Health Poisons, Nirn enchant here. Alright, so that's pretty much it for gear. So let's go ahead and talk about race. So I am a Wood Elf, however you can use any of the other stamina inclined races, so that's going to be Redguard, Khajiits, Imperials are not a bad choice if you have access to the Imperial Edition. Wood Elves is what I chose, but generally speaking, Redguard's going to be pull a little bit ahead here when it comes to DPS, just because they have higher max stamina. Same thing with Imperials. Wood Elves and Khajiits have better stamina regen. Khajiits have additional crit chance. And as you can see here with our weapon crit chance, it's pretty low. We're sitting at 35.9 without our Major Savagery buff. So with Major Savagery, this would be bumped up to 45.9. So having a Khajiit actually wouldn't be a bad choice, because on a bow build, especially if you're using War Machine and Agility, you're not really going to have very high crit chance, so it is useful to have the additional crit chance as a Khajiit. So you can use any of those races there. Those are all fine choices to use. For attributes, I have 60 points to stamina and 4 into health, and that's just to give myself a little bit of additional survivability here. So I am also using a heavy piece here. I'm using a heavy shoulders for my Velidreths with a stamina enchant here, and that's also to help give me a little bit more health. You don't have to put 4 points into health. You can put all your points into stamina instead, and just use a heavy piece there with your Undaunted passive and the heavy armor passive. You will be sitting at close to 17k health. It's kind of up to you how you want to feel, how you feel about your survivability. One thing to keep note of on my Warden build is you don't have access to Deadly Cloak, which means you don't have access to that 25% reduction from AoE damage. Because of that, Bobo Wardens generally have less survivability compared to their stamina counterparts, as well as to their magic counterparts, because you don't have any shields. That being said, you do have the advantage of being at range, so you have a little bit more time to react when it comes to mechanics compared to being a melee DPS. But generally speaking, your survivability is going to be pretty much bottom tier compared to the rest of the DPS specs out there. For our Mundus Tone, we're using the Warrior. You can go with the Lover if you'd like. It's going to depend on your group, how many debuff sets you have in your group. Remember that the penetration value that you want to hit is going to be 18,200. So take a look at what your penetration value is going to be if you have the Lover and then all your debuffs up. So Night Mother's Gaze, Sunderflame, Alkosh, Torog's Infused Crusher. And if using the Lover puts you over that penetration cap by a significant margin, I'd like to cut off of around 600 to 700, up to 800 or so, then it's going to be worth swapping over to the Warrior and then putting the rest of your making up that rest of your penetration through your CPs. So that's going to vary depending on your group, so that's something you just want to keep in mind there. So be prepared, you might want to use the Lover instead of the Warrior like I have here. For our food, we're sticking with max health, max stamina, that's no surprise there. Now for our skills, let's start off with our front bar here. So this is with the Master's Bow. If you were using the Asylum's Bow, like I said, you would be replacing Cutting Dive with Arrow Spray instead, Acid Spray. So we have Poison Injection, Subterranean Assault, Lightweight Beast Trap, Cutting Dive, Bird of Prey, and Wild Guardian as our ultimate. For our back bar, we have Endless Hail, Razor Caltrops, Bull Netch, we have Resolving Vigor here, Bird of Prey, and Wild Guardian again. So we do have a couple of flex spots here. So one thing you could do instead of running Lightweight Beast Trap is use, let's see here, just under Alliance War, you could use Stalwart Guard instead. And if you're going to go with this, then you would basically be getting rid of Lightweight Beast Trap, getting rid of Vigor on the back bar, and you have your Guard double barred. This basically gives you and whoever you're guarding minor force. That being said, even though it is a DPS gain, do keep in mind you are taking 30% damage from whoever it is you're guarding. That damage is taken from their mitigated damage, and then it's further mitigated by your own damage mitigation, so it's not going to be a flat 30%, it's going to probably be closer to like maybe 22-23% damage. But that's still something to keep in mind, especially because, again, you don't have as much survivability because you don't have Blade Cloak, you don't have any shields like Magic DPS do, so just be mindful if you decide to use Stalwart Guard here. So you don't have to use Vigor here if you'd like. I have Vigor here as a self-heal, but you don't need to use it. If you don't want to use Vigor, then you can just double slot Cutting Dive again. We're not going to be using Cutting Dive here. This is just for the Advanced Species passive, which increases our damage done by 2% for each animal companion ability slotted. Notice that it's damage done and not weapon damage, so if we take off, if our weapon damage here is 3214, if we take off Cutting Dive, we're still at 3214 for weapon damage. So this actually affects damage done. So this is going to basically be pretty much on par with the Fighter Skills passive increase with the 3% additional weapon damage boost. You can think of this as basically a much weaker version of Combat Prayer. Minor Berserk is a damage done. It doesn't improve your weapon damage, doesn't improve your spell damage, doesn't improve your crit chance or your crit damage. It's just a flat increase on the damage that you are you're dealing. So there you get a little bit more return, or more return than you would think out of Advanced Species than compared to the Fighter Skills passives here. So you can go with Cutting Dive here if you want to forego Vigor. And it's the same mentality here for Cutting Dive here. It's just for the Advanced Species passive. You're not really going to be using this as a spam pull. And again, if you're going to be using an Asylum Bow, then you will swap this out with Acid Spray. Where is it? Acid Spray. Acid Spray here. So I'm going to just put back Lightweight Beast Trap here. Alright. And that's pretty much it for front bar. Bird of Prey here is just for the minor Berserk. Ideally, your healers will be maintaining a pretty high minor Berserk uptime, but it's still nice to have your own source of minor Berserk. Plus, the Major Expedition might come in handy, and again, this helps gives us additional 2% damage done through Advanced Species. Now let's go over our champion points. We have 240 points across each of the 3 different constellations, so let's get started here with our green CPs. We have 75 into Mooncalf and 75 into Tenacity. That leaves 90 points, which you can put into across the remaining nodes however you'd like, depending on the passive that you want. I personally have 31 to Shadow Ward, 31 to Tumbling, and 28 into Warlord, but like I said, you can distribute them however you'd like. It's all dependent on how you want to conserve your stamina here. For our blue CPs, so just a word of caution here. So this particular CP setup is optimized for my rage group, where we don't have Alkosh as one of our debuff sets, so that's why I have 24 points into piercing. If you do have Alkosh and an infused Crusher, then you actually don't need that many points into piercing at all. I believe it's like 4 or 5 if you have infused, and if you have infused Torx Crusher with Alkosh, you actually need no points into piercing. So that's something to keep in mind there. I highly recommend you, if you're on PC, to pick up Constellations. You can see here, this is what Constellations looks like. Basically what it does is it takes a Comet Metrics parse, so you will need Comet Metrics as well. You hit import on a raid parse or a dummy parse. I recommend the raid parse because it's going to be a lot more accurate to actual raid buff times and things like that. And it'll automatically import all of these relevant stats. You will need to manually input weapon penetration. I believe the latest version of Constellations, if you're using the latest version of Constellations and Comet Metrics, will import weapon penetration based on the Comet Metrics report. But just do the math yourself. It's better to be a little bit safer than sorry, and just figure out what your weapon penetration actually is. Depending on whether or not Comet Metrics has data or not, you might need to play around with these values as well. So basically, like for example, if Endless Hail, for instance, is not being picked up for whatever reason, you just have to look at your Comet Metrics parse, say it makes up like 30% of your DPS, and you just add 13% to physical damage over time. That's basically what you would do there. Once you have imported your parse and figured out your penetration values, go over to champion points, hit calculate, and it'll tell you based on your damage, your report, what your optimal CP point distribution is going to be. So this is what is optimal for me based on what Constellations has given me. So I have 64 into Mighty, 24 into Piercing, 56 into Precise Strikes, 40 into Thaumaturge, and then 56 into Master at Arms. And now for our red CPs, I like to take a one-size-fits-most approach. So basically, that basically means I don't have to switch around my CPs as much depending on the content I'm running. But you might want to swap things around depending on how well you're able to know the content, how well you're progressing through the content, in order to improve your survivability. So for example, Maw of Lorcage, you're taking a lot more magical damage compared to physical damage, so you might want to take points out of Hardy and put them into things like Spell Shield or Elemental Defender, for instance. So I got 56 into Ironclad, 56 into Thick Skin, and 64 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. Now you can put 10 points into Quick Recovery if you would like, in order to get the Field Physician passive, which reduces the amount of damage you take while you're resurrecting another player. That's not absolutely necessary. Some people like to do it, other people obviously don't. Seems like I lagged out here. So we will quickly take care of that. So that's something that, like I said, you don't have to do. A lot of endgame players actually don't do it at all. They just leave no points at all into Quick Recovery. But that's something that you're going to have to discuss among within your raid group, whether your raid lead wants you to run it or not. Let's see here. Login failed. So once we log back in, I will show you guys the give you guys an example of the rotation on the 3 million dummy, so you guys can get an idea of what it looks like and what's going on through my mind. And I'll show you guys both the Master's Bow, if you're using the Master's Bow front bar, and I'll show you the Asylum's Bow front bar as well. Generally speaking, the Asylum's Bow is going to pull lower DPS compared to the Master's Bow because it's going to be a little bit more of a complex rotation, so that's something to keep in mind when you're doing, if you're looking at using the Asylums versus the Masters. So let's go ahead. Asylum Bow. So the Asylum Bow is when you deal damage with arrow spray, you cause enemies hit to take 45% more damage from the direct damage portion of your next snipe, scatter shot, or poison arrow used within 6 seconds. So it is going to be a little bit of a change here. So I'll talk you guys through the Asylum's Bow rotation first. Let's do this. So like I said, you would be getting rid of Cutting Dive in terms of arrow spray here. So obviously you'd start off on your back bar here. Make sure you have your bear up. I'm not going to use the bear here because it'll mess up the parse a little bit. And then you have your bull netch up, obviously. You want to make sure you start off with that. Drink your potion. Endless Hail. Caltrops. Then a heavy attack into arrow spray. Heavy attack into arrow spray. Then you're going to light attack into Subterranean Assault, heavy attack into Poison Injection, light attack into Subterranean, and light attack into Lightweight. So you see I am missing a couple of weaves here, that's not a big deal. So that's the general idea behind the Asylum's rotation here. So again, for your front bar, you'd be light weaving into each Subterranean Assault, and you're going to basically space that out between each ability. So for example, again, so let's just say we just managed to swap to our front bar here. Light weave Subterranean, heavy attack, queue up arrow spray. Light weave Subterranean, heavy attack, queue up poison injection. Light weave, light weave. And that would be your front bar rotation. Your back bar rotation is very simple. It's just light weave all of this. You will be putting up your bull netch every other full rotation. So again, you will be back here a little bit more. You will be a little bit more ranged compared to your standard melee. So I was up in the face, but Subterranean Assault I believe has a 20-meter radius, so that's actually decently far. So you can see here, you can actually hit it from a pretty far distance. So I believe you can still hit it from all the way out here. Yeah, so you can still hit the enemy all the way out here, and that's kind of what you want to do, because there is a passive under the bow line called Longshots, which increases the damage you deal with bow abilities the farther away you are. So, you want to try to maintain your distance a little bit here. So you can be pretty much as far back as your magic DPS are, because Subterranean Assault has just a little bit more range than Blockade, but again, you kind of want to be within range of that. So that's with the Asylum Bow. So let's swap back to our Master's Bow here and put back on Cutting Dive. Alright, so basically the rotation remains pretty much the same with the Master's Bow on the front bar. So your back bar rotation doesn't change at all. Again, you're just going to want to light weave every Subterranean Assault. You have 2 heavy attacks. You can actually animation cancel the Fist Slam from Subterranean Assault. And that's basically the entire rotation with the Master's Bow. It's a lot simpler, you don't have to worry about the arrow spray there. So that is the rotation there for the Master's Bow. Like I said, you obviously want to be a little bit further back. You don't want to be as close to the enemy as I was. You want to be around 18 or 20 meters or so. So you're just within range of the Subterranean Assault hitting the enemy, but you're getting that additional damage with the Longshots Passive. So now that we've done all that, we're going to go ahead and get started with a 6 million dummy parse so you guys get an idea of the sustain. So like I alluded to earlier, the sustain on the double bow build is not going to be very hot. It's not going to be quite as good because you are losing out on the 5-piece VO set. Now, do keep in mind you can use 5-piece VO as your body piece and do 3-piece agility if you'd like. That's another potential option there. So if you wanted to run that, you can, and you do get a little bit better sustain, and your rotation becomes a lot more sustainable. But you guys will get an idea of what the level of sustain you can expect to see with this. So actually what I'm going to do, because this area is a little bit hilly, I want to do someplace a little bit flatter. So I'm going to put the dummy here actually, so it's a little bit easier to aim our lightweight beast trap. So let's go ahead and get started here. So one thing I also didn't mention when I demonstrated the rotation of the 3 million is you want to use your Wild Guardian ultimate on the bar swap. So basically, I'll show you guys what I mean here. So let's go ahead and get started actually. So I would use my ultimate here. I can actually be a little bit further back. There we go. So you can see here with lightweight beast trap, we're definitely never going to be able to get full minor force uptime like we would with rearming trap. That's just the nature of lightweight beast trap. The rotation doesn't allow us to maintain 100% uptime on lightweight beast trap, so we're not able to get that 100% minor force. That's where Stalwart Guard comes in. So one thing to make very sure of on your back bar rotation is to make sure that Endless Hail actually starts ticking before you swap to your front bar. Otherwise the Maelstrom Bow enchant actually won't take any place, so you need to make sure that the Endless Hail actually starts ticking. Generally speaking, this rotation will guarantee that it will start ticking. You can see here we're starting to run low on stamina, so this is what I'm talking about when I say the sustain on this build isn't great compared to other builds. So we'll see how much stamina I'll have when we get to the end here. I think I'll have to heavy attack instead of light attack weave a couple of subterranean assaults here. I missed that subterranean assault. Yep, I'm gonna have to light heavy weave a couple of subterranean assaults here. So my rotation there was a little bit messy, just because we did run out of resources. Alright, and that is the double bow build here. So you guys kind of saw down on the lower left-hand side of the screen the Combat Metrics Live update. So let's take out the actual report here. So we pulled about 30.6k DPS, which isn't actually terrible. It obviously falls much lower compared to your other typical stamina DPS classes and builds, and definitely falls flat compared to your other ranged Magicka builds. So this is definitely, if you are in a guild that is running for score, running for leaderboards, things like that, going for speed runs, things like that, this is definitely not a build that you would be able to bring to those runs. But if you're in a more casual raid guild, 30.6 on a self-buff is actually pretty decent. So you can like I said earlier in the beginning of this video, you can definitely bring this build into something like Vet Kraglorn Trials 4-man content, but I would hesitate to bring it into Vet Maw. I'd hesitate to bring it into VHOF. Even though technically you did meet the typical cutoff for VMAW, part of running group content is you don't want to necessarily bring down the team, and when you have other ranged DPS who can pull better numbers with better sustain, you kind of have to take that into consideration. So this is more of a fun build that you can use, but it wouldn't be something that I would bring to competitive endgame PvE DPS. So you can see here that Subterranean Assaults is really, really powerful here. 13.4% of our DPS. Endless Hail, really, really strong. Our light attacks are very strong here, mostly because of the long shots increase. Because when it says bow abilities, it also means your light attacks and heavy attacks here. Razor Caltrops very strong. So your typical Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail are all very, very strong abilities here. And the Bear is very good as well. This is the Bear's normal attack, and this is the Bear's when you activate the ultimate here. As you can see, you're getting some pretty good hits here, and if you're running something like Mechanical Acuity or something like that, and you get Major Slayer from somebody else that's running Master Architect or War Machine or something, you can get pretty high numbers with this Bear, the Bear crit here. So that's it for this build video. I hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.